The 2-year betrayal, the alarm blared at 5:30 a.m., a brutal intrusion into the silent, gilded cage of her life. Eleanor Vance opened her eyes, immediately sealing herself off from the man sleeping beside her, a stranger she'd been married to for 2 years. Ethan Thorne lay with his back to her, as he always did, his unconscious posture a chilling, non-negotiable rejection of her very presence. She rose with a surgical caution, tiptoeing across the cold marble and travertine floor of the master suite. The Greenwich mansion, perched atop a secluded hill, was not a home. It was a mausoleum of silence and exorbitant luxury, where the echo of her own footsteps was a constant reminder of her utter isolation. In the cavernous gourmet kitchen, Eleanor meticulously prepared her lonely 6 a.m. coffee. 6 o'clock, precisely. Because Ethan would descend at 6:15 a.m. for his own, and their unspoken, sacred agreement dictated they cross paths only under the most absolute necessity. "Good morning, Mrs. Thorne," murmured Carmen, the housekeeper, gliding into the kitchen in an impeccably white uniform. "Good morning, Carmen," Eleanor replied, forcing a brittle smile. Often, these were the only words she spoke aloud all day. She gazed out the panoramic window at the perfectly manicured landscape, where every rose bush was mathematically aligned. It was beautiful, but utterly frigid, like everything in this house, and everything about her marriage. 2 years, 73,000 hours of enforced cohabitation, and they had exchanged perhaps 50 words in total. "Good morning. Good night. Thank you. Excuse me." Polite pleasantries between well-bred ghosts. The sound of Ethan's heavy, decisive footsteps from the floor above made her heart seize. 10. 5 minutes to vanish before he made his descent. Eleanor grabbed her mug and retreated swiftly to the second-floor study, where she would spend her day translating documents for multinational corporations, freelance work that kept her busy, and more importantly, safely distant from him. It was only when she heard the garage door close, signaling Ethan's departure for another day commanding Thorne Holdings, that Eleanor finally allowed her shoulders to drop. Another day of forced peace had begun, but neither of them could have imagined that their 2-year routine was about to be utterly annihilated by a single, simple request, a request that would change everything forever. It was 7 o'clock that evening when Eleanor heard Ethan's Porsche roar into the garage. She snapped her laptop shut, preparing for yet another solitary dinner, when she heard something unprecedented. Footsteps ascending the grand staircase toward the study. 3 soft knocks on the door sent a jolt of panic through her. In 2 years, Ethan had never once come up here. "Eleanor." His voice was hesitant, sounding strangely different. "Enter," she managed, trying to hide the tremor in her voice. Ethan opened the door slowly. At 32, he was undeniably striking, with impeccably styled brown hair, almond-shaped eyes that rarely met hers, and an imposing height that commanded any room. He wore a crisp navy Hugo Boss suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, but something was off about his posture. His hands were slightly trembling. I need to speak with you," he said, unable to meet her gaze. Eleanor felt the air thin in her lungs. Was this it? The divorce? Had he finally decided to end this elaborate, expensive farce? "Of course," she murmured, closing her notebook completely. Ethan walked into the study, his hands buried deep in his dress pants pockets. The room suddenly felt far too small for the two of them. "Tomorrow night, there's a major event at the Plaza Hotel in Manhattan. International investors interested in our residential projects." He paused, running a hand through his hair. I need you to accompany me." The words tumbled out, as if he couldn't wait to be rid of them. Eleanor blinked several times, processing. In 2 years of marriage, this was definitely the longest conversation they'd ever had. "You want me to go to the city with you?" she asked, incredulous. "It's vital for the company. These investors place a high value on family stability. A married man projects confidence. Ethan finally looked her in the eye. It's just one event, one night. Eleanor felt a confusing mix of indignation and cold curiosity. After 2 years of being treated like an invisible ghost, she was suddenly useful. And why should I agree? The question came out sharper than she intended. For the first time, Ethan seemed genuinely taken aback by a reaction from her. His eyes widened slightly. We are married. On paper? Eleanor countered, rising from her chair. Only on paper, Ethan. You've ignored me for 2 years. You've treated me like a phantom in this house, and now you need a trophy wife to impress your investors. The ensuing silence was unlike their usual empty quiet. This was charged with tension, with years of unspoken words. You'll fly with me tomorrow at 3 p.m., he finally said, reverting to his executive voice. The event starts at 8. We'll return the next morning. Eleanor watched him turn toward the door, but something compelled her to speak. Ethan, he stopped without turning around. The next time you require my services as an associate, at least have the courtesy to ask instead of simply informing me. She saw his shoulders tense. For a moment, she thought he would say something, but Ethan simply walked out, leaving behind only the subtle, expensive scent of his cologne and a completely bewildered Eleanor. For the first time in 2 years, she was certain that something fundamental was about to change. The question was, for better or for worse? The next morning, Eleanor woke with the strange sensation that the previous night's conversation had been a dream. But the note on her bedside table, written in Ethan's impeccable script, confirmed it was all real. The car will pick you up at 2 o'clock. Wear something elegant. She held the paper, analyzing every word. Even in a note, Ethan maintained his glacial formality. Wear something elegant, as if she were an employee receiving a dress code instruction. Eleanor opened the walk-in closet that consumed an entire wall of the room. Expensive clothes hanging in chromatic order. Gifts from her mother-in-law that she rarely wore. After all, who does a phantom dress up for? Her fingers slid across the luxurious fabrics until they found a midnight blue Italian silk gown she had received for her 26th birthday, 3 months ago. Ethan hadn't even remembered the date, but Margaret Thorne had sent a box from Bergdorf Goodman. Perfect, Eleanor murmured, taking the dress from the hanger. While she took a long, hot soak in the marble tub, she let her mind wander. Why had Ethan asked her to come now? For 2 years, he had appeared solo at dozens of corporate events. What had changed? At exactly 2 p.m., a black Mercedes pulled up to the mansion. The chauffeur, a middle-aged man in a sharp uniform, stepped out to open the door. Mrs. Thorne, I'm Charles. I'll take you to the airport. Eleanor took a deep breath. She felt like an actress about to walk onto a stage for a role she hadn't rehearsed. At Teterboro Airport, she was escorted directly to the executive aviation hangar. The Thorne Holdings private jet gleamed in the afternoon sun, as imposing and intimidating as everything in the Thorne universe. Ethan was already on board, focused on his laptop, wearing a charcoal gray suit that brought out the steely color of his eyes. As she entered the cabin, he glanced up for only a second before returning to the screen. Good afternoon, Eleanor said, seating herself in the beige leather chair across from him. Good afternoon. The response was automatic, without him lifting his eyes again. During the 40-minute flight into New York, they did not exchange a single word. Eleanor watched the clouds outside the window while Ethan typed furiously on his keyboard. The only sounds were the soft hum of the engines and the constant tap-tap of the keys. As they landed at LaGuardia, Eleanor realized her palms were sweating. It wasn't nervousness about the event. It was the sheer tension of being this close to Ethan after 2 years of carefully maintained distance. The car will take us straight to the plaza, Ethan said, closing his laptop. You have an hour to prepare before the event. An hour is sufficient, Eleanor replied, surprised by the firmness of her own voice. As they exited the plane together, Eleanor noticed something she hadn't expected. A few people at the airport were watching them. A beautiful couple. He, clearly a successful executive. She, elegant and mysterious. For the first time in 2 years, Eleanor saw herself through the eyes of strangers, and she didn't like the elaborate charade they were playing. In the car, heading to the plaza, she made a decision. If Ethan wanted her to play the role of the perfect wife, she would do it. But this time, it would be on her own terms. "Ethan," she said, breaking the heavy silence inside the Mercedes. "Yes? If I'm going to be your wife tonight, I need to know who I'll be speaking with. Who are these investors? What exactly is this project?" Ethan looked at her as if she had sprouted a second head. In 2 years, Eleanor had never once shown interest in his business. They're European, primarily German and Dutch. They want to invest in luxury residential complexes on the East Coast. His voice was cautious, as if testing unknown ground. "And why did they choose Thorn Holdings? We have experience with large-scale projects and—" Ethan stopped, studying her face. "Why are you interested?" Eleanor smiled, the first genuine smile she'd worn in months. "Because, contrary to what you seem to believe, I am not just decoration. I have a degree in finance from NYU, I'm fluent in Spanish and German, and I worked in consulting for multinationals before." She paused, letting the silence hang heavy. "Before I became invisible." The silence that followed was different from all the others. Ethan watched her with an expression Eleanor couldn't decipher. Surprise? Interest? Or just irritation that she was deviating from the silent wife script? "Just tell me about the project, Ethan. All the details," she said, her voice soft but authoritative. "I don't know," was all he said. "There are a lot of things you don't know about me, Ethan. 2 years of marriage, and you never bothered to ask who I truly am." The Mercedes pulled up in front of the iconic Plaza Hotel. The uniformed doorman approached to open the doors. Eleanor took a deep breath, adjusted the midnight blue dress, and prepared for the first night in 2 years that she would not be merely the invisible Mrs. Thorne. Tonight, she would be Eleanor. And a little voice told her Ethan was not prepared for that. The grand ballroom of the plaza was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden light over a setting adorned with white orchids and scented candles. Businessmen in suits and women in evening gowns circulated with flutes of Dom Perignon, speaking in multiple languages about deals worth millions. Eleanor entered the room beside Ethan, feeling all eyes converge on them. Her midnight blue Italian silk gown hugged her figure discreetly, while her brown hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders. She felt beautiful for the first time in years. "Ethan, how wonderful to see you!" A tall, gray-haired man approached with a warm smile. "And this must be your lovely wife." "Klaus, allow me to introduce Eleanor, my wife," Ethan said, placing his hand lightly on the small of her back. The touch, however formal, sent a shiver down Eleanor's spine. "A pleasure to meet you, Eleanor," Klaus said in fluent English. "I'm Klaus Weber, of the Weber Development Group." "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Weber," Eleanor responded in the same language, extending her hand with grace. "I've heard excellent things about your sustainable housing projects in Germany." Klaus's eye lit up. "You follow the European real estate market?" "Professionally, yes. I worked as a consultant for several international firms before." Eleanor shot a meaningful glance at Ethan before turning her focus back to the investor. Ethan was watching her with an expression she had never seen before. Surprise? Admiration? Before she could analyze it further, another group joined the conversation. For the next hour, Eleanor circulated the room at Ethan's side, conversing fluently in Spanish and German with the investors. She discussed market trends, sustainable construction, and growth opportunities on the East Coast with a knowledge that impressed everyone, including her own husband. "Your wife is very sharp," a German businesswoman commented to Ethan, while Eleanor spoke in Spanish with a group of Madrid investors. "You are a lucky man." Ethan followed the woman's gaze to Eleanor, who was gesticulating animatedly while explaining something about the U.S. market. Her eyes held a sparkle he had never noticed, or perhaps had never truly looked for. "Yes," he murmured, "I am." It was nearly 10 p.m. when Eleanor excused herself to the bar for a glass of water. She was feeling a confidence she hadn't had in years when a masculine voice surprised her. "Excuse me, aren't you Eleanor Vance?" She turned and found a dark-haired man around 35, wearing an elegant tuxedo and a warm smile. "I'm Eleanor Thorne now," she corrected politely. "And you are?" "Robert Sterling. We were in the same finance class at NYU, remember? I sat 2 rows behind you in international markets." The memory came back instantly. Robert Sterling, the brilliant student who always asked the smartest questions. He was more mature now, more confident, but the smile was the same. "Robert, of course, how are you?" Eleanor felt a genuine joy, something she hadn't experienced in a long time. "Very well. I run an international trade consulting firm here in New York. And you?" "Still in the field. I work freelance, mostly translation and ad hoc consulting," Eleanor admitted, feeling a slight embarrassment. "What a waste," Robert said, shaking his head. "You were one of the best students in the program. With your experience in international markets, you could be leading any multinational firm." Before Eleanor could respond, she felt a familiar presence behind her. Ethan approached, his posture stiffer than usual. "Eleanor," he said, in a tone she couldn't quite identify. "Ethan, this is Robert Sterling, a college friend. Robert, my husband, Ethan Thorne." The two men exchanged formal greetings, but Eleanor sensed a subtle tension in the air. "Robert was just telling me about his international consulting firm," Eleanor said, trying to smooth things over. "How fascinating," Ethan replied, though his tone suggested the opposite. "Actually," Robert said, addressing Eleanor directly, "I'm expanding the firm and looking for someone with your profile. How about dinner tomorrow at the Polo Bar to discuss it further? I have a proposal that might interest you." The silence that followed was charged with tension. Eleanor felt Ethan's gaze burning her skin, but something about Robert's offer intrigued her, an opportunity to be professionally valued after years of invisibility. She began. But Ethan cut her off. "We are flying back to Greenwich first thing in the morning," he said, his voice controlled, but firm. "What a shame," Robert said, but his eyes remained fixed on Eleanor. "Perhaps in Greenwich, then. Do you have my card?" As Robert walked away after exchanging contact information with Eleanor, she realized Ethan looked different. His fists were clenched, and there was something in his eyes she had never seen before. Jealousy. "Ready to go?" Ethan asked, his voice rougher than usual. Eleanor followed him silently to the elevator, but her mind was racing. In one night, she had rediscovered who she truly was. Smart, capable, interesting. And for the first time in 2 years, someone, in fact, several people, had truly seen her. The question was, had Ethan seen it too? And if so, what would he do about it? In the elevator ride to their floor, the silence between Eleanor and Ethan was deafening. She watched the numbers climb on the digital display, while feeling the weight of his gaze on her. When the doors opened on the 12th floor, Ethan stepped out first with purposeful strides. "We have separate rooms," he said curtly, handing her a keycard. "We leave at 8 a.m. Eleanor took the card, her fingers briefly brushing his. "Ethan, are you all right?" He stopped in front of the door to room 1205 without looking at her. "Why wouldn't I be? You've been different since I spoke with Robert. I don't know what you're talking about." Ethan swiped the card into the lock with more force than necessary. "Good night, Eleanor." But something in his tone made Eleanor take a step forward. For the first time in 2 years, she wasn't simply going to accept being dismissed. "We need to talk." "There is nothing to talk about." "Oh, yes, there is." Eleanor surprised even herself with the firmness of her voice. "You brought me here to play the role of the perfect wife, and that is exactly what I did. I conversed with your investors. I impressed them with my knowledge. I was the partner you wanted me to be." Ethan finally turned to her, his almond eyes glinting with an emotion she couldn't name. "And you did a fine job," he said in a low, controlled voice. "You played the part very well." "Then why are you acting like I did something wrong?" "You did nothing wrong." Ethan ran a hand through his hair, disrupting his perfect style. "Absolutely nothing." Eleanor studied his face, searching for clues. There was something in the way his shoulders were rigid, in the way he avoided looking at her directly. "You're jealous," she stated, the revelation coming out as a question. Ethan's eyes widened. Don't be ridiculous. You are. You're jealous of Robert." "Why would I be jealous of a complete stranger?" "Because he saw me." The words left Eleanor with a raw honesty that startled them both. "For the first time in 2 years, someone looked at me and saw who I really am. Not just the invisible Mrs. Thorne, but Eleanor, the person underneath this expensive dress and this wedding ring." Ethan stared at her in silence. In the quiet hotel corridor, she could hear her own heart pounding. "And you didn't like that?" she continued, taking a step toward him. "You didn't like seeing other men interested in the woman you've ignored for 2 years. "Eleanor," his voice was hoarse, "for 2 years you treated me like I was transparent, like I didn't exist. And tonight, for the first time, you saw me being seen and it unnerved you." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, as if fighting an internal battle. "You're right," he finally admitted, his voice barely audible. "I didn't like it. I didn't like the way that man looked at you. As if you were—" "As if I were what?" "As if you were the most interesting woman in the world." The silence that followed was different from any they had shared. This one was charged with possibility, with words waiting to be spoken. "And do you know the most ironic part?" Eleanor asked softly. "I have always been that person. I've always been smart, interesting, capable of holding a fascinating conversation. But you never bothered to find out." Ethan opened his eyes, and Eleanor saw something in them she had never seen before. Regret? Desire? Fear? "You're right," he said, "and I don't know how to fix this." For the first time in 2 years, Eleanor saw vulnerability in Ethan. The confident, imposing CEO had given way to a confused, lost man. "Perhaps you could start by trying to genuinely get to know me," she suggested gently. Ethan took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. "What was your maiden name again?" he asked. And for the first time, there was genuine curiosity in his voice. Eleanor smiled, a small, genuine smile. "Eleanor Vance, daughter of James and Maria Vance, born in Brooklyn, graduated from NYU Finance, dreamed of working for a major multinational. And what happened to that dream?" The question hung in the air between them, laden with 2 years of unhealed history. "Perhaps," Eleanor said, sliding the keycard into the lock of the room next door. "That is a conversation for another day." She entered her room and closed the door softly behind her, leaving Ethan alone in the hallway, finally beginning to understand what he had forfeited during 2 years of deliberate blindness. Months later, Eleanor stood in the Greenwich Garden, observing the simple, elegant decor she had chosen herself. White roses and green foliage adorned a small, improvised altar under the pergola where she and Ethan now habitually took their morning coffee. Her 6-month baby bump was discreet beneath the cream silk dress she had chosen specifically for this occasion. This was not a traditional wedding gown. They had already had a formal, cold ceremony almost 3 years ago. This dress was for a new promise, a new beginning. "Mrs. Eleanor, you look lovely," Carmen said, adjusting a white flower in her loose hair. "Mr. Ethan won't be able to stop staring." Eleanor smiled, touching her belly where her son, they had found out it would be a boy, was actively moving. "Do you think we're doing the right thing, Carmen? Renewing our vows like this?" "I believe you are following your heart, and after everything you've been through, you deserve to celebrate the real love you've found." There were only 20 people present, Eleanor's parents, with whom she had reconciled after months of family therapy, Carmen, a few close friends, and employees who had become part of the family. Significantly, Ethan's parents were absent. His father still hadn't forgiven his son for walking away from $1 million deal for the sake of sentiments. As soft violin music began to play, Eleanor walked slowly through the garden she had helped redesign, transforming it from something formal and cold into a warm, living, open space. Ethan waited for her near the altar, wearing a simple navy suit, stripped of the ostentation of corporate events. When their eyes met, he smiled with a tenderness that reminded her why she had fallen in love with him. The officiant, a pastor friend of the Vance family, opened the ceremony with simple words. "Love, Ethan, can grow, even in the most improbable places. That two people can find each other, even after years of living as strangers. I promise to love you for the man you are today, not for what circumstances forced us to be. I promise to build a family full of love with you," Eleanor said, tears streaming down her face. When they exchanged the new, simple wedding bands they had chosen together, both were weeping. "You may kiss the bride," the pastor said, officially starting their new journey. The kiss was soft, filled with forgiveness and hope. As they separated, the baby kicked hard, eliciting laughter from them both. "I think he approves," Ethan said, placing his hand on Eleanor's belly. Later that evening, as the last guests departed, Eleanor and Ethan sat on the veranda, watching the stars. The mansion was no longer a silent mausoleum. It was a home, full of life and hope. "Do you regret it?" Ethan asked, stroking her belly. "Giving me a second chance?" "Never," Eleanor replied. "But do you regret dissolving the contract? You lost a lot of money because of me." Ethan laughed, a full, genuine sound. "I gained a wife who truly loves me, a son on the way, and a life worth living. How could I regret the best deal I ever made?" And for the first time since they had met, both fell asleep completely happy and at peace, knowing that they had finally found the love that was worth all the pain and confusion of the preceding years. Profound lesson. The shocking truth of their arranged marriage taught Eleanor and Ethan a crucial lesson that wealth could not buy. True connection is a choice, not a contract. Love isn't found in legal documents or luxury homes, but in the courage to be vulnerable and the consistent effort to truly see the person standing beside you. Only when Ethan sacrificed the illusion of control and the security of his fortune did their gilded cage shatter, proving that the most valuable thing in life, genuine love, is always built on a foundation of honest, conscious choice, and it's never too late to start building it.